What we're looking at tonight, it isn't just another political campaign. We're digging into a playbook, a really detailed strategy, one that's been tweaked and perfected for decades, that has one goal: to fundamentally change the balance of power in America. And at its heart, it's a story about secrecy, about absolute loyalty, and a direct challenge to the rule of law. So let's break down how it all works.
I am your retribution. You hear that? And you've got to understand, it's not just a slogan you put on a bumper sticker. It's a promise. Everything we've seen in the source materials shows this is the single organizing idea for a potential second term. It's a vow to retaliate against a system that he and his supporters believe has betrayed them. That one idea, well, that's the engine for this entire playbook.
But this idea? It's not new. And if it sounds familiar, it should. That quote right there, from Richard Nixon in the depths of the Watergate scandal, it's the same core legal argument we're about to get into. The belief that just by being president, you are somehow above the very laws you're supposed to enforce. It's a framework for absolute power that's been sitting on a shelf for 50 years, and believe me, it is making a comeback.
So that's really the big question we're tackling here. How did this deeply controversial legal theory, born from one of the biggest political scandals in U.S. history, get dusted off, supercharged, and turned into a step-by-step plan for a totally new kind of presidency? To get that, we've got to go back to the beginning.
You see, Chapter 1 of this playbook wasn't written in Washington. Nope, it was hammered out in the courtrooms and the smoky backrooms of New York City by one of its most notorious lawyers, a man named Roy Cohn, who happened to take a young Donald Trump under his wing.
And here is the core tactic in action. Back in the 70s, the federal government sued the Trump Organization for racial discrimination. The lesson from Cohn was brutally simple. You never, ever admit you're wrong. You always punch back, but 10 times harder. And here's the key. The court of public opinion is the only court that really matters. That single move, turning defense into overwhelming offense, became the foundation for absolutely everything that followed.
Okay, so fast forward a few decades. After the events of January 6th, you see the system, the established institutions of American government begin to push back. And this wasn't just some political fight. It became a full-blown stress test of the Constitution, with Congress and the Justice Department finally moving in to enforce some accountability. And the sheer scale of the January 6th committee's work was just mind-boggling. I mean, we're talking over 1,000 interviews, millions of pages of documents. Their final report wasn't just a summary. It was laid out as a direct blueprint for prosecution, which they then handed right over to the Department of Justice.
But what happened when they tried to get answers? They hit a total wall of secrecy. As you can see here, instead of cooperating, key figures in the administration just met them with lawsuits and flat-out refusals. The playbook was now being used against Congress itself. It was a strategy of complete and total defiance, all designed to make the investigation itself seem illegitimate.
So the main point here is that you can draw a straight line from that committee right to the Justice Department. In fact, many legal analysts looked at Special Counsel Jack Smith's indictment and said, hey, this is pretty much a carbon copy of the committee's final report. It really looked like the system of checks and balances was actually working, moving from investigation to indictment.
But this is where the playbook evolves in a pretty incredible way. Because what should have been a political disaster, multiple criminal indictments, was instead transformed into a source of almost unimaginable political power. The very tools meant for accountability were flipped around and used as campaign fuel.
And this, right here, is the pivot. The indictments are no longer presented as a legal crisis, but as political persecution. Each new charge becomes, as he put it, a great badge of honor. The message to his base was unmistakable. They're not just coming for me, they're coming for you, and I'm the only one in their way. And you know what? It worked, in a way that is just stunning. A moment that would have been the absolute end of any other political career, a presidential mugshot, was immediately turned into a fundraising machine. The campaign said it raised over $7 million from merchandise with that photo. They claimed his poll numbers shot up. It was this incredible act of political jujitsu, turning a historic negative into a powerful positive. So that brings us to the next phase of this playbook, and this is where it shifts from just playing defense to playing offense. This is a detailed, proactive plan for a second term. A plan that isn't shy about promising retribution, and one that has been put together with meticulous care. 920. What is that? That is the number of pages in the playbook for something called Project 2025, a plan put together by a whole coalition of conservative groups. Just the size alone tells you this is not some list of campaign promises. No, this is a department-by-department, line-by-line blueprint to radically remake the entire U.S. government,
starting on day 1.
So how do you even begin to do that? Well, a major tool is something called Schedule F. I know it sounds like a boring government form, but its power would be massive. It would let a president reclassify tens of thousands of career government employees, we're talking scientists, policy experts, attorneys, and make them fireable at will. The goal? To replace anyone seen as disloyal with people whose only allegiance is to the president himself.
And you just have to listen to the language the architects of this plan are using. It is so revealing. They talk about deconstructing the administrative state, rooting out vermin, clearing out a viper's nest. The goal they state, very openly, is to destroy what they call the deep state, all those career officials they believe undermined the first term, and rebuild the government so it's loyal only to the president.
Now, all of this, every bit of it, rests on one very specific and highly controversial legal theory. It's the intellectual backbone for this entire playbook, and it fundamentally challenges the very idea of checks and balances as we know them.
It's called the unitary executive theory. The idea, argued by people like law professor John Hugh, is that Article 2 of the Constitution gives the president total 100% control over the entire executive branch. From this point of view, things like independent agencies or even special counsels are unconstitutional. It is the legal argument for a president to act without the traditional constraints of Congress or the courts.
And this just shows you how dramatically different these two visions for the presidency really are. The traditional American system we all learned about is built on checks and balances. The unitary executive model, though, it imagines a presidency where the president's will is the final word, the entire bureaucracy is personally loyal, and, to bring it all back to Nixon, what the president does simply cannot be illegal.
And I have to stress, this is not just a theory anymore. This abstract legal doctrine became very, very real when the Supreme Court granted former President Trump broad immunity for official acts he took while in office. It was a landmark decision that gave a huge stamp of approval to a key part of this playbook, and it led one dissenting justice to warn that this ruling risks creating a president who is, in fact, a king above the law.
Which brings us to our final and, frankly, very unsettling question. The entire American system was designed to stop any one person from having unchecked power. But if a president can fire anyone who disagrees with them, if they're immune from prosecution for their official acts, and if they believe their authority is absolute, what guardrails are even left? That is the fundamental question at the very heart of this modern political playbook.